Good evening. Welcome to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver. I'm an employment law and business law attorney and founder of the law offices of Eric M. Sauver. I'm here tonight with my special guest, fellow employment attorney and conflict resolution specialist and resolution coach, Nance Schick. Nance, welcome to the show.
Hey, Eric. Nice to see you again.
You too. I was going to say, you're a return guest. You were on my show back in October 2020 when it was just getting started. And we were talking about some issues related to COVID-19, which is still with us, though thankfully, and maybe changing a bit, but it's great to have you back. And I thought I would tell our audience tonight what our topic is, and I'll give you a proper introduction. Okay, great. So I should say that Employment Law Today is on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. I host this show on Talk Radio NYC, and I have guests like Nance and others who discuss pressing topics around employment and business for small to mid-sized business owners, entrepreneurs, and employees as well. And with that, our show tonight is best practices for managing employees during and post-COVID-19. And basically, as we enter this post-vaccination stage of the COVID-19 pandemic, many employers are anticipating or even demanding a so-called return to normal from their employees. They want normal levels of productivity, in-person work, as well as compliance with COVID-19 regulations and protocols. So the question becomes, what happens when business owners manage essential workers who never had a break during COVID? And how do employers deal with employee burnout during this COVID-19 recovery period? So on this episode, Nance Schick and I will discuss the best practices to maximize communication and to de-escalate conflict between employers and employees, and address workplace challenges in ways that minimize your liability and can maximize your employees' morale. So it's a mouthful there. And with that, Nance, again, really glad to have you.
We're going to do that all in an hour.
Yes, we'll do that all in 57 minutes even. So
oh, right. Exactly.
You can believe it, right? But yes, and I think we'll just be flowing along here. But yes, and I want to introduce you again, Nance. As I mentioned, Nance Schick is an employment law attorney, as well as an ethno-religious mediator and a conflict resolution coach and author as well. And she is the founder and president of Third Ear Conflict Resolution. Nance is also an employment attorney licensed in New York, and Nancy is certified in mediation, coaching, DISC, that's D-I-S-C, personality assessments, education law, and tax law. And before law school, she was a human resources supervisor, a minor league hockey agent, and a plaintiff in a sexual harassment and gender discrimination lawsuit. A survivor of abuse and multiple crimes who grew up poor in Kentucky, she loves helping people break through upper limit challenges. That was her motivation to write her first book, DIY Conflict Resolution. So yes, again, Nance, really always great to have you on the show and to talk with you.
It's always funny hearing people read the credentials. I have my own coach, right? And he likes to remind me that just gathering a bunch of credentials doesn't always solve everything that we think it's going to. And as two lawyers, right, who've had a lot of education and some credentials, yeah, it's not quite the way we thought. And I think it leads us right into the topic for today of this desire to go back to normal. And you just have to accept that there's no magic switch that we're going to flip and go back to March 11th, 2020, right? That's just not going to happen. There's nothing that's going to make up overnight for everything people have lost and been through. And so that's where I wanted to start the conversation, and hopefully you get that too, is that we're on the same page. Is we have the ability to either embrace that there's a quote new normal, and I know we're getting tired of hearing that, or we can dig our heels in and demand that everything go back. And I think we know which one we probably need to choose and make the most of what we have to work from.
Absolutely, Nance. It's so important, I think. Oh, pardon me, I have a little feedback here. Let me just fix that right now if I can. There we go. I think that's a really important point. You know, there's a lot to be said for us for the acceptance piece of this pandemic and of life in general, whether we're talking about, say, on a personal level as we go about our lives, but it's really hard to separate, right, the personal and the business. And employees don't become robots who turn off or compartmentalize, you know, their psyche and their emotions and their just general well-being, their personal life. They don't turn that off when they enter the workplace. They don't turn it back on at 5 p.m. So, you know, really important to, and we're going to get to all those issues as well, and the issues that are encompassed with that overall theme that I think you mentioned. I did want to ask you a starting question I like to ask my guests. I think it frames the conversation nicely, which is if you could tell us a bit more about yourself. I know you said a lot there, but when you started practicing law and what prompted you to take this creative, less traveled path as a mediator and coach and attorney?
Yeah. So I have been practicing law since February 22nd, 2002, almost 20 years. And I think it's one of those, milestones that I'll never forget that day. Plus, it's kind of a palindrome to some degree, and I like twos. So I never forget that. What started me there was probably really, it was an interest in law from being in human resources. And that was where I got my first real taste of employment law and the human aspect of work, which I didn't necessarily have. My relationship to work, like a lot of people probably even watching this, your relationship to work is like, that's how I get money so I can have stuff I want, right? and things I need, right? And that was about all I had done. But when I got into human resources, I got a broader viewpoint of what work does for people and how it gave me some identity, for better, for worse, right? And so I started exploring that more and more. And then as you mentioned, I'd been a plaintiff in a lawsuit and employment related. So I decided at that point, maybe it was time to go ahead and do the law degree that I had been anticipating doing kind of part-time. And there I was learning civil procedure in the courtroom and the classroom simultaneously. And I knew from that point that although I needed to learn law to be more valuable to workplaces, there was something different I wanted to create for people. Having been a plaintiff myself and winning a judgment that I never collected on, going through that 4 years of litigation and how it tied up my life, I said, there's got to be something better. And we need the courts. I don't hate the courts. Some people are like, oh, let's get rid of the justice system. It's terrible. It's good for certain things. But I think there's a lot we can do if we just build the skills to stay out of court, and then let the ones that really need somebody else to tell them what's right, leave those in the courts, because we need that. But most of us want to create the solution on our own. We just don't necessarily have the skills. So that's pretty much how I shifted into this alternative view of law and an alternative way of executing the strategies that we use for our clients.
It's interesting, Nance. I hear a few things there that I hear from a lot of guests, which is the way that a personal experience can shape our desired career path or passion or goals. And you mentioned, being a plaintiff in your own employment-related harassment suit, and then learning in the classroom and in the courtroom. I find that interesting that so many people I know, they're transitioned to a new career, or their passion for a different path on a career, and it starts with their own experience. And I think, to some extent, I think many of us have that, something that drove us to the path we chose in our professions. So interesting you mentioned that. And you also talked about, as an HR person, seeing the human side of employment. And I recognize that as well as a fellow employment law attorney. I represent business owners and employers and management in employment and labor law issues and business law. And I'm also a big fan of the philosophy of negotiation, alternative dispute resolution, mediation, if can be, if it's possible. And really, I think that some things just, for whatever reason, that doesn't happen. They end up in court and being litigated. But most clients I've known have been happier when they could resolve something sooner rather than through those 3 or 4 years of litigation you mentioned. So, and I think it's a relevant topic now because there's more and more litigation I'm seeing in all the updates and news and around particularly coronavirus and COVID-19 in the workplace, whether it's around illness or workers' comp or unpaid time off that was given, or people filing for retaliatory discharge because they were pressured to quit rather than take a COVID-19 related leave. So I think it's really important that we, talk about this. And so glad to hear that background from you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to piggyback on that a little bit, is that one of the things that I experienced for myself, and I even have a video out there where I talk about how I didn't want to sue. And that's another thing that I think we want to get across to a lot of people, is that the main reason employers in particular end up in lawsuits and defending claims is because the employees don't feel heard. And so that's usually the only card they know how to play, is that maybe they've tried to go to their supervisor and their human resources representative, if it's a large enough employer where that's more than one person, right? A lot of our clients, that's the owner, the HR person, the person who's also doing some of the work side by side with the employees, right? But I've found that over and over, that's what I hear. Is employees, even when employees reach out to me and ask, can I help them? It's a lot of times they've already tried another channel. It doesn't mean that you won't occasionally have that employee who just comes and is looking for an excuse to file a claim, but that's a lot more rare, I think, than just the employee who doesn't feel heard because maybe their supervisor is overworked and burnt out and doesn't know what to do, right? It's all, like we said, it's the human aspect of this, and people just don't know how to be heard, and they don't necessarily know how to deliver what their demand is. And we think demand, it sounds like I'm forcing something on you, but really it's a request. And if you relate to it as a request,
right,
and truly consider it, instead of, oh, I'm busy, or, oh, I forgot, right? And we talk about this. I got a lot of that training when I was at UPS in HR, and doesn't mean I'm perfect at it, right? But the only way you get good at anything is to practice it.
Very true. Absolutely, Nance. Yeah, and I think you're right about this, that the need to be heard. And also, I think it's important we talk about what are some of the issues that managers should be mindful of when it comes to employees in the workplace during COVID-19, during this period.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you already hit on is that we're hearing all this talk about going back to work, right? And there are a whole bunch of people that are saying, what do you mean back to work? Right. I've never stopped working, and I've been working harder than I've worked in years. I work in the funeral industry. A lot of my clients are in that profession. They haven't gotten a break. They were working 7 days a week, 15 and up hours. They didn't get a break. The hospital workers, healthcare workers, essential workers in retail, the grocery store workers, who they are because you saw them every time you were in the grocery store in your neighborhood, right? And they haven't really had a break. And they are fatigued just like we all are. And I think we have to be very sensitive to that. And on top of it, they've lost income, they've lost loved ones, et cetera. So we have to remember that it's a whole person that's there, even if we tell them not to bring their whole person to work. That's impossible.
Right.
My whole person is right here with you right now.
And I don't think managers realize that deep down, they probably don't want a slice of a person. They don't want a compartmentalized performance machine. They want the person, they want the whole perspective, the insight and the wisdom and the compassion that comes, and even the enthusiasm at times if the managers are treating employees right. And I think, it's important. You mentioned some good points there, Nance, that I heard. One about the essential workers who have really not gotten a quote unquote break during this pandemic. And two, even the so-called non-essential workers who were able to work from home and Zoom, as you pointed out, we're saying back to work, but we're not coming back to work 16-month vacation. And these people were not, most people at least, a lot of them, especially in the workforce in certain industries, were working from home while their spouse was, and while their kids, their young children were at home being Zoom schooled. And everyone that has kids or knows someone that has kids knows that homeschooling small children is a very easy, no problem, stress-free situation, right? So when you combine that with an easy, stress-free working at home, of course, I'm being facetious here, you get employees who are burnt out, and you get people who are exhausted. And this thing about we're coming back to work, and we're coming back to the physical workspace, but we've actually been in a hard place. And we also have, speaking of places we're at a commercial break spot right now. So it does go.
Speaking of needing a break.
Yeah, in terms of the segue there. So folks, you're listening to Employment Law Today, and I am your host, Eric Sauber, here tonight with my guest, Nance Schick, and we're talking about managing employees during COVID-19. When we come back, Nance is going to address some of the different personality types of managers and leaders in the workplace and the best ways they can address COVID burnout. So stick around and we'll be right back.
Have you ever thought of reinventing yourself? Are you looking to create a new life's journey? Hi, I'm Kevin Barbaro, host of Coffee Talk XL every Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc. Tune in live to hear me and my guests from a variety of different backgrounds. As a former college coach and a current full-time actor and owner of multiple companies, my show is as eclectic as my life. That's Coffee Talk XL every Tuesday night, 8 p.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Are you interested in having a better relationship with yourself, others, and God? Greetings. I'm your host, Dr. George Andow, for the show A Journey Through into Awareness. On my show, we journey into the awareness that the mind of God is the true seat of our personal consciousness. We join together each Monday at 7 p.m., so tune in on Talk Radio NYC.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant. And on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back, folks, to Employment Law Today here on Talk Radio NYC. And I'm your host, Eric Sauber, employment law business law attorney, joined tonight by my guest, attorney Nance Schick, also employment attorney, and founder and president of Third Year Conflict Resolution, and author of the first book, DIY Conflict Resolution. So Nance and I have just been discussing, for those that joined us late, we're talking about best practices for managing employees during COVID-19, and particularly at this stage of the game. And I just want to ask you another question, Nance, I think, because we seem to be flowing so nicely here. I'm wondering, so what are some different personality types of managers in the workplace? And what are the best ways for managers to address, say, COVID burnout and challenges by employees who have an opposite personality style?
So as you know, we talked about this the last time. I'm DISC certified. So that would be dominant is the D, influencing is I, steady or supportive is your S, personality style, and C is for compliant. Now, mind you, these are default personality styles that I use as a guideline. You're not locked into them. It's right. It's not like your horoscope. You were only born once and you fall into a thing, right? It's nothing like that. It's not who you are, but these are guidelines that give you some ideas. So say, for example, a lot of your high level managers and maybe business owners, they have a more dominant task focused personality style. These are the people that also, by the way, have not gotten a break, right? We talk about the employees not getting a break. As a business owner, you, me, we haven't really gotten a break, right? No. There's been PPP to learn, PPE to buy, right? It's like there's been a lot of those things going on, and learning the different programs and learning the different guidelines. So these are the dominant people. Now, mind you, I'm not a dominant personality style, just FYI. I own my own business, but I have elements of that where I can become so task focused that I want to go full steam ahead. But your D personality style is often the one that's running that way all the time. And so as people are coming back to work and things are starting to open up, these are the leaders who are like, we had a 20% or 50% loss of income last year. So everybody's got to work 120% or 150% to make up for that. Day one, starting Monday when you come back.
Right.
Not going to happen, right? It's not going to happen. It's great that you are full steam ahead. You have to understand that your employees, especially just statistically on the DISC, your employees are probably going to fall in one of those other categories. So what you want to look for are things like the influencing people. Those are your extroverts. Those are your sales people. They're the leaders in your groups, right? They're the ones that can get things out, right? Like you give it to the influencer, they'll get the buy-in and they'll get things done. So you can imagine if you're a D and you want things done, having the influencer on your side and developing that relationship is going to be crucial to moving forward.
Right.
But you're not going to be able to do it by just saying, come into work, hit the ground running. They've missed people. They need some social time with their coworkers. You want to create some space for them to do that. Similarly, you've got those supportive people, those high S people. They're worried. Is everybody okay? Who lost people? Where's Susie? Where's Joe? Why aren't they back? What happened to them, right? And this may be happening if you didn't get the break and you're not just coming back. This is already happening, and it's been happening by Zoom, right? So, and by the way, your S, high S, the statistically speaking, that's probably the majority of your population. They need to see that you care about them, and they need to feel like that's genuine. They're not going to be able to just come in and be told what to do without you recognizing that they've been through a lot. And again, that's the majority of the population. And then you've got your compliant people. These are your more introverted people, behind the scenes, technical, very focused on the process. What do you think they're interested in? They still want to get the tasks done.
Yep.
They want to know what's the plan and will it work? So if you start thinking about like the different focus and the key things that people need, then you're going to be able to have different conversations with them. But the caveat is to not assume you know, right? Even though I just told you that the majority of your staff is probably in the high S supportive study, and they need to know they're secure and everybody's okay. You don't want to assume that. And you want to recognize we all have aspects of all of these in our personalities depending on what's going on. So as an employer, the number one thing you can do right now is be with your people and ask them what they need to be successful in their jobs.
Right.
And maybe what they need is some time off.
Yes.
Right? But you're going to have to look at them as individuals and look at yourself as an individual. Because where do other people make mistakes, right? Where do our leaders and our clients make mistakes? It's when they're worn down. Yes. They're burnt out. they have pandemic fatigue. Some of them have PTSD, depending on what they had to witness.
Sure.
Especially if you're here in New York and you lived in the epicenter during the worst of it.
Mhm.
A lot of us are still dealing with the aspects of that.
Absolutely. Yes. You
So I
know,
gave you a lot. Did I answer your question?
you did, and I think it really a lot to, but it's a good answer. It really, I think, hit the nail on the head. Even before hearing the disc, when you mentioned it on your first time in the show, before hearing the dominant, the influencer, the steady supportive, and the compliant personality types, I'd heard of different personality types through different tests out there and other information. And I know that I've noticed that clients who are business owners who don't recognize that their employees might have a different personality and style than they do, that it tends to create more conflict, right? Because, excuse me, they imagine that the employees are looking at the situation the same as them. So if they're dominant, like you pointed out, they think that, well, I want to hit the ground running. I want to get things back to normal. I want to control this and take action. And they just presume that others are in the same boat. But if they're not, it's going to create unrealistic expectations or a fractured communication. So, and I think you also said something good there about not presuming that you know someone's personality style just from the statistics. So, I mean, hearing you talk about that, I was thinking about myself in terms of maybe a D&I combined. But there's also other elements there too, right? Of the supportive, the concern about people, that aspect as well. And yeah, I know that even with, so I think with employees too, we have to really look at that. And I think it's important to note if we're especially now with people like you said under stress and burnout. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things I love to bring forward when I'm talking about DISC is that one, it is fluid, right? What we're talking about in this context of it this time is the default personality style, because most of us have been under so much stress, we're going to our default, right? We go to our default when we're under stress, and because that's how we coped in other stages of our lives. But it doesn't mean that we can't be the other things. The idea is not to point out what's wrong with someone and why they're different and shouldn't be, but to look at, again, like how I mentioned, the influencer is a great asset to you.
Mm-hmm.
The supportive people are very powerful for you also, because if you're not great at relating to people and you're much better at getting tasks done, then getting those influencers and supportive people on board and having them do that, right? They're filling in the gaps. And we know that, right? Great leaders find people and put them around them who do the things that they can't.
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about, is not looking for what's wrong with somebody because they're different. And boy, could we get into that conversation on another episode about, race, gender identity, disabilities, right? All of that. But it's like, that's really what we want to look at, is how do we take the way people function by default and more naturally and amplify that toward the business goals in partnership, in employment partnership.
Right. And you mentioned that earlier as well. Sorry, just a microphone here. Not sure what that is. You mentioned that earlier, I think also, Nance, about the fact that we all come with different skill sets, and it's about acceptance and awareness of people's levels and personalities and where they're at, and not just trying to railroad somebody into fitting a certain mold. And I think another important point you made is that when we're under stress, we go to these default personality styles, particularly. And so, who hasn't been under stress in the last 16 months? And you could argue life's often stressful, but since COVID-19, I think it's become so much part of our day-to-day that many employers that I've seen, or at least I work with, have forgotten just how much of a toll this pandemic has taken and can still take. We tend to think, we're back out with our friends again. We're doing more things socially. We're meeting in person, which is all fantastic. But as I think you and I discussed, this pandemic is not over, and we're not trying to just keep coming back to it or prolong it or paint a doomsday picture. It's just part of the reality. People are still concerned. They're still adjusting and adapting. And I've seen a lot of employment law cases where managers don't understand that and then employees get resentful and there's a huge clash. And if the employee is fired, often they'll presume that it's based on some other trait, which it may very well be. That's a whole other conversation that I know you and I are probably on the same page about, to talk about implicit bias and microaggressions, not just the obvious so-called covert or rather overt bias, but certainly, people I think are coming to realize that there are all these different nuances, and you want to have employees that are not burnt out and then feeling rejected and angry, and sort of let go or brushed aside. You if you minimize conflict, very often that can minimize the chances of somebody parting ways and seeking out a plaintiff's attorney, which I used to be for a long time, employee side. So I want to get into more of this with you. It is, believe it or not, time for our second commercial break. So when we come back, Nance and I will talk about some liability issues that employers and managers need to remember when you're addressing employees' COVID-19 related requests. So I'm Eric Sauver. I'm here on Employment Law Today, Talk Radio NYC with Nance Schick. Nance Schick, forgive me, it's been a long day. Stick around, we'll be right back.
Do you feel uninformed about menopause and how it impacts on your life? Hi, I'm Pat Duckworth, women's health strategist and host of the Hot Women Rock radio show, empowering women leaders at menopause. Join me every Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. UK time on talkradio.nyc for interviews with inspirational women who will share their top tips to rock your world.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Do you run or are ready to open your own business? Hi, I'm Jeremiah Fox. I've been operating and opening small business for the last 25 years, and I'm the host of the new show, The Entrepreneurial Web. Tune in every Friday at noon Eastern Time for insights and stories on the nuances of running small business right here on Fridays at noon, talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver, and here tonight with attorney Nance Schick, who specializes in employment law and mainly in conflict resolution and mediation and basically dispute resolution, things of that nature. So Nance, really great topic tonight, I must say, this whole topic of best practices for managing employees during COVID-19. I really appreciate your joining us tonight and sharing all your insights and your knowledge in this topic.
Thank you. I always enjoy coming back and being with you. And you know as well as I do that not necessarily your listeners and your viewers, but we could talk about this kind of stuff all day because it's, one of the things that got me into employment law was that, as I jokingly say, but it's true, pretty much everybody either has a job or knows someone with a job. So it's like the great equalizer, right? I get to work with people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, internationally, religious, right? All of it. And I think that's the other reason it's so fascinating to me, because it's like this microcosm of the world, right? It's so integrated in certain places. Obviously, we have some work to do there, but takes us, I believe, right into the topic we wanted to get into.
Absolutely. Also, I love that it really is an equalizer in terms of we all, except unless maybe perhaps you're retired or in a certain different situation, but most people, as you mentioned, either they have a job or they know someone with a job, a relative. That's just pretty much, and those equalizers in life, I find they really bring out our humanity. When you said that, it made me think of something that I've always thought of, is that I really take comfort in sort of this bedtime routine, getting ready, with washing your face, brushing your teeth, all that kind of stuff, and Listerine and whatnot. And the thing is, I like it because it's an equalizer that you can be, the king of a nation, or a poor person somewhere, perhaps struggling to get somewhere in terms of socioeconomic power, and they'll use the same toothbrush and maybe even the same toothpaste when they're getting ready in the nighttime and morning and getting prepared. So I think that's a great comment about the equalizers. And, you talk about this topic of managing employees during COVID-19. I feel like it would not be complete without some mention of liability issues, right? In terms of like, there's a human element of, hey, do these things, keep these best practices for compassion's sake, for the sake of humanity, and also just to maximize morale. But there's also, a very much real liability issue. And so I find that, like I can think of some, liability issues that come up for employers when they're not mindful of the different personality types and when they're not aware of their own stress level and burnout. Like, for example, I know there are employers out there who they hear an employee ask an accommodation request under COVID-19, maybe to work from home still because they're suffering from anxiety from the pandemic, like a anxiety disorder, or as you mentioned earlier, Nance, PTSD. I think there's even a post PTSD syndrome related to COVID that's been discussed in the mental health industry practices. So when people ask for that accommodation, if an employer is, let's say, a dominant type and frustrated that somebody wants quote unquote time off, or doesn't want to produce, so they think, they can get angry and say no. And the law does require that you, at least give a reasonable accommodation analysis. See if, can they take time off? Can they do their job, reduced schedule from home? Is it not too much of a drain on the company's finances, logistical operations, resources? And if the answer is no, they can still do their job, it's not too much of an undue hardship, then you have to provide that. So I think that's one of many issues. There are folks who are not getting the vaccine, religious objections, but you can require them to get that. And if you're, let's say, perhaps a little more of a codependent manager, one who fears making waves, you might not want to bring up that topic. But you can bring it up, and you really should get clarity around people's conditions and so forth. So just a couple of issues that came to mind for me. I wondered if you've seen some liability challenges as you do your conflict resolution these days.
Yeah, I think this is where I'm seeing it a lot more in my coaching practice these days. Apparently, I've done a pretty good job of explaining to people what I can do on the front end. So where it comes in is people are calling me because maybe it's the small business where the business owner is also doing the same work that the employees are doing, and they haven't gotten a break. And then their employee who they're counting on to come in to work on a client matter calls in. And then it's a whole thing. They call in sick. Well, what symptoms do you have? We're still having to have those conversations, even if the employee is vaccinated, right? Because we still don't know if that employee could get COVID again, even with the vaccine. There are some people that are doing that. So we're still having those same conversations. And what happens for me is, of course, I'm giving them the legal parameters, but I said, let's talk more about what's really going on with you, employer, right? Let's here's what we've done. Here's what you have to do. Nothing's changed. You still need to ask about the symptoms and possibly send them for a test, do all of that. But let's talk about the frustration, because usually at that point they've called and they're pretty frustrated, and I can hear it in the tone of their voice. Right. Like, let's talk about what is up for you. Have you gotten a break? Can you build that in? How can you build that in? Let's create a plan right here on this call before you hang up. I want to hear, and I'm going to check in on you, right? Because it's so important that we remember that, again, it's an employment partnership.
Mhm.
And I say it that way is like, no, it's not a legal business partnership. But on the personal side, you're there coming together to achieve mutual goals,
Yes.
right? And yes, you have some individual goals also, but it's no different than going into a marriage or anything else, right? And there's something in it for both of you, or you wouldn't be in it.
Right. Good point.
So just see that and remember that it's a person on both sides of it. We tend to call it corporate and employer and give things titles to depersonalize it, to make it supposedly easier to make decisions. But it's not, because that's where we get into trouble. Like you're saying, is that the leader comes in and is treating another human being like a thing. But it works on the other side, just FYI. The employees do that to their managers too. How many do anybody demonized a manager before? I've done it too, right? And so we have to remember that none of these entities run themselves. They're run by people.
You know, and that's, I think, very much a principle, a bedrock principle, in my opinion, of mediation, conflict resolution, and employment, or rather, alternative dispute resolution, ADR they call it, in law and employment situations. Because you're right, I think, you know, people, when they lose that conception of their employee's humanity, or as you mentioned, vice versa, the employee who thinks, you know, the manager is a monster, if they step back, they can see that there is some pressure and stress they're under as well, and they have their own financial pressures, their own challenges with their personal lives and their lives in general. And I think it's so important to realize that. And I think that recognition, combined with something else you said about encouraging your clients to sort of de-escalate their own internal anger or stress level, right? Take a break. Like that old adage, old saying about, you know, count to 10 before you say something when you're angry, or, you know, so take a walk and walk away, you know, to have some restraint. I think it's so important to say that, because I noticed in employment law that the more technology has advanced in the last, I'll say 22 years I've been practicing thereabouts, the more that technology has advanced, where you can just say whatever's on your mind instantaneously to as many people as possible, right? You can you can Snapchat, you can Slack, you can text, you know, whereas before, like if you had a situation, say 30 years ago, you're angry at somebody, you had to go back to your desk and your computer and type up a memo, type it up, and then print it, and then take it and put it through the inter-office mail or fax it. And so you had all those intervening steps to hopefully cool off and not build, you know, a head of steam of anger. So I think it's really important. I think, you know, and I think if more employers took that step, and employees too, there'd be less perhaps conflicts that escalate into the employment labor litigation issues. Because even if an employer made a mistake, they could hopefully see it and recognize it, and an employee can hopefully be willing to work with that employer to remedy it if there's a better relationship.
And I think another really key skill that great leaders start to develop is the ability to ask questions. And when I say leader, by the way, for those of you who are employees and maybe aren't in a managerial role, you can still lead from wherever you are. So maybe maybe your supervisor is really stressed out and has done something that's upset you, or they said something that's upset you. You can go back and say, I want to make sure that I got this right, because my head is telling me that you were being really mean and I'm making you out to be a monster. Can I ask you what you meant to communicate there? And likewise, you can, of course, do that as the supervisor, and you probably should be trained to do that.
Yeah.
This is what I work with people on, because it's about finding that common ground and remembering that we're both human and we're trying to do the best we can under some extraordinary circumstances.
That's so true. I mean, even the idea that, you know, with people just working through this very challenging time, and I think it's important to to make those points and to ask those questions to people, most definitely. And I want to talk a little bit more about your services once we have this commercial break. So once again, I'm Eric Sauver, an employment law, business law attorney and host of this weekly show, Employment Law Today. My guest tonight, the very insightful employment law attorney, Nance Schick, founder and president of Third Year Conflict Resolution. When we come back, I'm going to ask Nance to share more about her services and how businesses can really benefit from them. So stick around. We'll be right back.
Are you passionate about the conversation around racism? Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. TLC, host of the Dismantle Racism Show, which airs every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc. Join me and my amazing guests as we discuss ways to uncover, dismantle, and eradicate racism. That's Thursdays at 11 o'clock a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sauver, employment law, business law attorney, and host of the new radio show, Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
Howdy, I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Gateway to the Smokies. It airs on talkradio.nyc every Tuesday night from 6 p.m. to 7. Every episode is dedicated to memorable experiences in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and surrounding areas. This show features experts and locals who expound upon the richness of culture, history, and adventure that awaits you in the Smokies. Tune in every Tuesday from 6 p.m. to 7 on talkradio.nyc.
Do you love or are you intrigued about New York City and its neighborhoods? I'm Jeff Goodman, host of Rediscovering New York, a weekly show that showcases New York's history and its extraordinary neighborhoods. Every Tuesday live at 7 p.m., we focus on a particular neighborhood and explore its history, its vibe, its feel, and its energy. Tune in live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver. Again, I'm here with my guest, Nance Schick. Great to have you back on the show, Nance, and good to be talking with you this evening.
Thanks again for having me back.
Sure thing.
It's been a really interesting discussion. I hope everybody that's seeing it, whether you're seeing it on the recording or you're watching it live with us right now, that you're getting some good insights on what to take back to your workplace to help us all get through the pandemic and actually come out of it better than we went in. I still think that's possible.
I do too. I share that as well. And I hope that people are watching or listening on the Listen Live feature on Talk Radio NYC at the station and or watching on Facebook, and they can see this and really appreciate what we're talking about tonight. So I think our goal is to educate and inspire and inform, uplift people. And so, yeah, absolutely. Wanted to ask you a question, Nance, related to your services. Mainly, I wanted you to, if you could, tell us more. You told us some already, but tell us more about your services as a coach, as a mediator, and a conflict resolution specialist in terms of how do you assist employers with conflict and what services are you finding most in demand during this pandemic?
So I still do some defense work for a couple of my very large corporate clients that I've been working with for, we'll just say almost 2 decades, right? Since the beginning of my career. And I have a very special relationship with them because they know my conflict resolution background and they understand that although I may be defending them, I don't want to alienate the employee. right? These are people that are probably going to come back to work in an ideal situation. So that's what we do, is we first assess it for that. Yes, can I put my litigator hat on and still sharpen those teeth, right? I prefer not to do that, and my clients for the most part don't want or need that. So I still do a little bit of that, but most of my work is in the ADR, the alternative dispute resolution. So what I'm finding, especially recently, is similar to what I mentioned earlier about the employers calling me because they have a very specific issue with a particular employee and they feel underskilled to have a conversation that won't land them in court, to be perfectly honest.
Right.
And it's not just about, I don't want to have to go to court. Like, look, court's a miserable place, even for those of us who are trained to be there. You know, I hate to say that. Those of you that work in the courts, God bless you. I appreciate the hard work you've been doing too. And I know you've been exposed to some difficult things during the pandemic. But let's face it, it's not a great place for the average person to be. We feel very uncomfortable there. When I was a plaintiff, I did not know how to navigate it. It was very scary. Mm-hmm. And most people don't go to court. So my goal is to keep people from getting there. Right? And then they can work with the litigators who are even more skilled than I, who like to go there and know how to navigate that. But I would rather build up those skills on the front end. So I start talking to them about, like I mentioned earlier, the frustration with the employee, what's really going on, because it's an exasperation I hear in their voice a lot of times when they've called a lawyer. And you can imagine, because how many of us call lawyers in a given week or even a given year?
Sure.
It's kind of like having to call the funeral director or the doctor, the dentist, the oncologist, right? It's not something we really want to ever do. So I forgive you if you don't want to talk to me. Right? But I can help you identify some of the issues and get into the fear, and then build up your skill to have a really powerful conversation about what you truly need from your employee. But we do it a lot from asking the right questions, right? And not just asking the questions for, let me figure out if that employee is wrong and I need to terminate them or I need to discipline them, but to really find out what is it they need to succeed with you. And sometimes the answer is, it's not going to work. That doesn't mean you just cut them loose and forget about them, right? They're not trash. I've helped some of my employees find alternate employment that's more suitable to them. And then we both win.
Yep.
And if you think, again, about it from the position of partnership, right, that you're mutually benefiting from this relationship, you're going to have a different experience.
It's interesting, and I laugh because I do some litigation work. Of course, I'm in the courts, I'm in arbitration, mediation. I defend my clients. Sometimes I'll be the plaintiff's side in a commercial litigation dispute. So definitely can go there. And I've noticed though that, but I also too, as I mentioned earlier tonight, agree with you that I think a conflict resolution approach is often the win-win for everyone. And one thing I've observed over the years, Nance, maybe you have too, but it seems that when somebody like really wants to go to court or decides to go to court, there's an initial, I've noticed an initial sort of like a rush they have and a feeling of empowerment, or that they're like taking action and standing up for themselves. But when you come back 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, and the litigation is still going, the very common questions that we attorneys get, as you know, right, is, okay, when is this over? What's next? You know, when do we get rid of this? When is this done? And sometimes the answer is, well, do you want to reconsider the demand and negotiate something that's lower than that? Maybe not something that will make you super happy, but not something that's going to end up evening out in the long run. If you go to court and even if you win, you spend so much on attorney's fees, or you get a partial judgment against you. So my clients who might be watching might be a little confused, but if you are, I'm happy to talk to you after the show. But anyway, but I think it's an important point. And speaking of after the show, we're not there yet because I don't want this ending. It's been a great conversation, but we do have 3 minutes. So I want to give you 2 minutes to talk about your contact info, how we can reach you, any specials you have coming up in terms of, so the floor is yours for 2 minutes.
All right, so I did prepare this nice little slide that I'm going to share that has my contact information on it. And and it has my book. So I just released the 3rd edition in May of the DIY conflict resolution. And it's kind of part workbook and some narrative. You'll hear the story about my violent assault and how it also reinforced the idea that we needed something better. And I talk a little bit about restorative justice and some different ways of resolving even criminal conflict. But what I've been hearing from most people is the most valuable piece of the book is the exercises. And so I invite you to take a look at that, and you'll see I also gave you the link for the DISC assessment if you want to learn more about that, because I still find that that's a really powerful tool. And it's been so helpful for me. But I think one of the big things I want to make sure that I leave employers with, and I think it kind of points to something you said too about that adrenaline rush that we sometimes get when we're going to court and we feel like we took action, right? We took some sort of action to finally put an end to this conflict that we've been having. And then it wears off, right? It's like when you sign up for the gym and on January 2nd, you're in the gym and you're ready. And by January 5th, you're like, gosh, this is a lot of work, right? And so, it's really about like asking yourself as leaders, do you want control or do you want results? And you and I talked about this in preparation for this. So I wanted to make sure that I got that in. And what I mean by that is that just demanding that employees do something, it doesn't work.
Yep.
It doesn't work for the long haul. That's why employees leave. If you're ruling that way, instead of learning what makes them tick and working with that and capitalizing on that, that's not a bad thing. Maximizing someone's potential is actually a good thing.
Right. And Nance, I love everything you're saying. I agree so much. We only have a little bit of time left, so I'm going to wrap. But thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Eric Sauver, the host of Employment Law Today on Talk Radio NYC. My guest, the very talented, insightful, and compassionate Nance Schick. I think it's great the way you took hard situations in your life and used them to accomplish a lot of really impressive things. So thank you so much for being here. I'm here at 5 p.m. with guests of mine on Tuesday evenings, 5 to 6 on Talk Radio NYC. And Nance, thank you again and have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Sure.